G'day, Ziggy here, and welcome to today's podcast. Now, today we're going to be talking about things relating to business. So if you're a business owner, you're going to love today's session because you're going to get some information on shareholder agreements, tips and traps, what to look out for, particularly if you're in business with someone else. What happens if that other person wants to exit? They get into trouble. They get sick. What are the tips and traps, and what do you need to ensure that in place? And so if you're in business with someone else, the other story you're going to hear, which I absolutely loved, was that we're going to learn of two people that were in business together for 2 days. Two people, 2 days, and then gone. So sit back and enjoy this one. We've got Peter North on board again. Peter, thanks for coming in again. I noticed you were in the same shirt as last time.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed
totally
that.
new,
I noticed
totally
these
new
things.
day.
I noticed these things. So am I.
I didn't spill coffee on this one.
Yeah, I spilled a bit of coffee. All right. So we didn't do a joke last time. Right. Now, I like to start off with a joke. Now
It's not going to be a lawyer joke, is it?
Well, no, it has to be a lawyer joke because that's the flavour, right? That's the flavour. What's the difference between an accountant and a lawyer? Because I'm an accountant, I can say this, and you're a lawyer, so I can say this too.
You tell me.
Well, we accountants know we're boring.
That's about right. I always say that I have a job because I read boring things that nobody else wants to.
That nobody else wants to. I certainly don't want to. I do rely on you for all my commercial needs. So we're on to commercial law, which I know has been your specialty. It's one of the things that you do really well. You handle all our stuff here at 3P. You've handled some stuff with me personally, and we've engaged. So I've had that first-hand experience. But let's talk about, when we're talking about commercial law, tell us what it is.
So what I normally say is that I help business owners and managers manage the day-to-day legal issues in their business. And so that just means that, and somebody said to me once, it's like, business is easy. You're just buying something for one price and selling it for more, and then a million details amongst that.
In between, yeah.
So what we do is we help with some of the detail, and particularly the legal issues in that. So everyone running a business will have some form of legal risk, whether or not they're aware of it or not, in the contracting space or handling of personal information. And we aim to be the trusted advisor for business owners and managers and helping them through those processes. And that covers a broad range of areas. So employment, trade terms, privacy.
Trademarks, like you handle for 3P?
And agreements of all types, so supplier agreements, customer agreements, and part of that as well is once people are successful and they've run their business for a while, eventually they potentially look to sell, and so we help them through those processes as well. And then we do buy side as well. If clients are actually wanting to buy a business, we'll help them to go through that process, either mergers, acquisitions. So it covers the whole gamut and covers a whole lot of different industries. And one of the I think it's a privilege to be in the room with them as they're making decisions and helping them to make decisions. Most of our clients are exceptional at what they do, and we're just really coming alongside them to help them to focus on the things they want to focus on and help them to just receive the legal information that they need to assess risk and to mitigate risk where they can.
I had when I was young, I had a smart guy who said that you need a good lawyer and a good accountant. I reckon you need a few more others around you as well. But yeah, that's a good start.
I heard you wanted a really smart but not super brave accountant.
Yes, go up to the line, but certainly don't go over the line.
Yeah.
One of the things that as an accountant for many years, and now my focus is in financial planning more than it is accounting and tax, but for many years when clients would come and say, look, I'm thinking of setting up a business, what are the different tax structures that are available to me? And so it was always interesting because after that, I'd always sort of refer them to a lawyer and say, look, you need to chat. And some would follow that would go and see a lawyer about the issues that you've spoken about, but a lot wouldn't. And so it was always interesting to say, okay, well, you're coming just for tax purposes, but the biggest, when you're dealing with, when you're dealing with the risks in business, like they're the biggest thing that could just destroy the business. Tax is going to have an impact, but it's probably not likely going to destroy the business unless tax officer heaps of money in there chasing you, right? But why is that? Why is that? And what are say the top? You mentioned some of the things that involved in business, but why do you think that's happened? Is it awareness? Is it people don't want to pay the fee? They think you're expensive. What is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what might be holding them back, but I certainly think that that working with lawyers is and professional advisors more generally is an acquired skill. So people will go to professional advisors and ask. They don't necessarily know the questions to ask. And so I think it's a matter of actually journeying with them as they go through that process. For me, certainly from a structures perspective, I agree. I think that it's essential for new business owners or new business people wanting to start a business to actually explore that, because what you want to try and avoid is having your personal assets at risk to the vagaries of the business that you're in, to the extent that you can, which often involves putting a structure in place. And there's tax optimization strategies that can help you depending on the type of structure you want. But then also, depending on where you want to end up, you might choose a different structure. So if you're going to be potentially adding in other shareholders later down the track, then you might not choose a discretionary trust, because that would make it much harder. So certainly I think that it's a collaborative process between accounting and tax and financial planning and the legal side and helping the client to realise where your advice stops and where someone else's begins, and then helping manage the transition to get that other piece of advice is part of the job, really. But yeah, I don't think I think it's an acquired skill. So you learn as you go, and certainly sort of you can tell the CEOs of large companies, they know how to deal with lawyers and get what they need from them at the time that they need it.
Yep. I think you're right. I think a lot of it is awareness, or the lack of awareness. I think that's what we're trying to do at 3P by having, all the disciplines and saying, look, I think you should speak to Peter North for these reasons. I think you should speak to Chris Borg on the accounting tax side for these reasons. And so most clients do listen. Most clients do listen and understand it, particularly if they go, I get that. I get why I would speak to the lawyer. I get why I would need to speak to the so that's important.
I had to do my own bookkeeping at the beginning of starting 3P Legal, so I had to learn and be on the receiving end of that. It's been advice. So you really have to. Sometimes you have to start back at the beginning and feel like you're learning again.
Okay, so talking about business, and you mentioned there that if you're bringing in a partner and some of the structures that are available and may work well and may not work well. Let's talk about that, because I think that's an area that is not covered enough. Is not. I think that there's certainly a lack of awareness. So many businesses that we see and we get as clients, and there's just no agreements in place on the what if. When we're talking about insurance, for example, about life insurance, and it's a what if. When we're talking about I guess when you're talking about wills, it's not a what if, it's just when. But certainly on the powers of attorney, that's a bit more of a what if. But when it comes to having a business and having agreements in place in the event that, what if your business partner became incapacitated? What if your business partner got charged with something and all of a sudden is in trouble? What if you had a fallout and you want to separate things? If there's no agreement in place, then it really hits the fan.
100%. One of the things that we do at 3P Legal is to help people to have agreements between business owners when they are first starting out, and they're incredibly important. Often you have people are 50-50, they're friends, they start a business, everything's great, but then down the track, obviously things change. Their perspectives were different. One person has kids in private school and the other person doesn't, and it's the cash that people want to draw more cash out of the business. So there's a lot of areas where business partnership or going into business together will result in potentially different perspectives. And I see, there's some foundational documents like the shareholders agreement or the unit holders agreement if you're in a unit trust, which effectively there's a two-part process to it. One is actually having some guardrails for how you actually manage business processes and how you're going to manage this particular business. But two is actually getting them to talk about how they make decisions and what things are important to them before they actually start. Because it's much better to have the conversations now rather than later when you're emotionally charged.
Yeah.
So when they're happy and in, not in love, but in love, then it's better to have those conversations about what ifs. What if you have an accident? What if you're no longer wanting to work in the business as much as you used to? How much should we be working in the business? Can we do other things at the same time? Because they can be much more complicated discussions at a time when it actually matters. And at least you'll have built in the guardrails that if you're not talking to each other, which is the biggest difficulty, then you at least have some mechanism by which you can go to the courts and say, hey, they're not doing what they said that they were going to do. And or because of that, there's consequences, because that's the other thing about owning shares in a business, privately held business, or company. There's no obligation, you can't force them to sell. So people are stuck together.
Yep.
So it really is like a marriage, and we see it as a bit of a prenup, having a shareholders agreement, which will at least allow them to talk, or at least a pre-marriage course, where you talk through some of the issues and how you make decisions, and then you actually sign off on it.
Yep. But you can have in the shareholders agreement trigger points where talk about if someone is incapacitated.
Yeah.
That could be a trigger that could then.
Yeah. So, and this is where you would come in potentially is with the insurances. So you can have a trigger where it's like, well, because obviously private business, it may be hard to find a way to liquidate to if one party does want to sell, then really the only viable person to buy is the other party. They may not have the cash. And particularly if they're incapacitated, it's a sort of a necessity potentially to get them out of the business. So you can get insurances that will cover a person for those events, and then at least there's some money that comes in and gets paid out for that purpose.
Yeah. Because very important. For example, something we're business partners, we're shareholders in the same company, right? And if something happened to me, I know Katina for a fact she doesn't like you, right? So she wouldn't want to.
She loves me. I don't know what
I know she loves you. I know she loves you. She loves Kelly.
That's true.
But the thing is that Katina's a radiographer. She has no interest in taking my place here.
Nor does Kelly.
So there's, we've got a shareholders agreement, but there are things in place to say, okay, if something was to happen, if then this is what's happened, and that's very clear. And again, coming back to tying it in with estate planning, that just means it's easier.
That's one of the other things I usually say is like if there was trust, like universal trust, you probably wouldn't need lawyers. So if X, Y, Z happened, then or if X happened, then Y would then follow. If that is the agreement, then theoretically, if there's trust and people do what they say that they're going to do, you wouldn't need agreements.
Yes.
But ultimately, the courts are there to enforce agreements, and so having something that's there that says if X then Y, if Y doesn't happen, then at least there's something to do. If it's just a sort of oral agreement or an understanding, it's much harder to prove, and it's better to have it in writing, so that you can at least have those guardrails enforceable.
Yeah. It also comes into play when you're talking about a sale, right? Because let's say, for example, you have one partner that's a lot older than the other one. At some point, the older partner is going to want to exit. So typically, the discussion would be around a succession plan of the younger partner, or bringing someone in, or what sort of agreements is that? Again, does that form part of the shareholder agreement, or are there other things that need to be put into place?
Yeah, so certainly a structured buyout from one of the parties buying out the other is a useful thing. Effectively, it's succession planning, but for the business. So it's like your estate planning, but for where they're talking about their individual one. But so yeah, there's a number of different strategies that you can use for transitioning, like say a majority shareholder ownership down to a minority, and they're worth going through the gamut of options that are available. I mean, at the end of the day, if there are no viable internal options where it's like management or family wants to buy in and sort of buy you out and slowly move you on, and then you may have to look at a third-party sale of some trade sale, which is certainly an option. And we work with a lot of corporate advisors that help people through that process.
Yep. Awesome. Good. What about some either mistakes you've seen or some horror stories? I know we can't go into detail, but I'm sure in your travels you've even heard of stories. Or what about some tips and traps when it comes to this area?
Look, the shortest period of time that I think that I've seen someone go from starting a business with a partner to going their separate ways was 2 days.
2 days?
Yeah. Because
it's got to be a record. 2 days.
One party did not turn up to the initial meeting because they were at a strip club, and then thereafter the business went downhill from there. So,
yeah. I mean, they're probably at the strip club for a few days. That's why they didn't make it.
To be fair, it was a 9 a.m. meeting, so.
Been there the night before, planning on being there the full day the next day. Mindset wasn't there for a business; it was somewhere else.
So
2 days.
I highly recommend the process of having a shareholder agreement, so you can find out if you're on the same page. They should have had the meeting
at the strip club.
You can find out if you're on the same page about how to actually run a business and what are important priorities and what are not important priorities.
That's a classic.
So yeah, definitely.
Well, you could have said when it was, it was at the footy or they were overseas or
it was honest.
It was honest. What a classic.
For him.
Goodness me. And so the poor other person was just like, the other ones go, woohoo!
Not sure the exact specifics. But yeah.
What a classic. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. But obviously I can't talk about most of the things. But
we'll put all the disclaimers that we know. Yeah, she's loosely based on a real story.
Yeah.
All right. You also deal in mergers and acquisitions. I know, and that's a sort of... Actually, before I get to that, we're talking about shareholders and we're talking about companies and exiting and that. One of the things in planning, we talk about here when it comes to wealth, is we're planning for clients' personal wealth and financial planning. So we're planning their retirement. We're planning giving them advice on investments, reduction of debt, et cetera, And what a lot of people don't do if they've got a business is they don't do planning for their business. And so, I know that's one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of, running some seminars and webinars, et cetera, which we'll do into the future, and combining that on the accounting and tax front, because it all fits in, right? Because we've got to make sure that the business is creating wealth, so that wealth can then pass on to the owners and individuals who can then retire comfortably. Because if that wealth if that doesn't grow, then personally they're going to have an issue. But if that wealth is also not protected, then it doesn't flow anywhere. So a shareholders agreement protects that wealth and has it transitioned in a right way. Are there any other legal things we need to keep in mind for that protection of that wealth in a business?
Well, I think having an eye on personal liability, so where you might have personal liability, to the extent possible, mitigating that. So I think that and you can see that in various places, like when you take out a major lease, you've got options of putting up a bank guarantee or giving a personal guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
And so effectively that means that the individual is personally guaranteeing the debts of the company. And technically that's piercing the corporate veil, but it's pretty standard these days. That in certain circumstances, so trade credit, whatever, you are often put in a position where, in order to get what you want, which is, I want to buy goods on credit, they say, well, sure, that's fine. I'll do that for your company, but also provide me with a personal guarantee as a part of that. And same deal with the lease. It's like, sure, I'll give you a lease. I'll rent it to your company, but you'll have to enter into a personal guarantee. So to the extent possible, you mitigate, or at least you are fully aware of when you've given some personal guarantees and where you are personally liable. And you take great care to make sure those debts are paid. So I think that's certainly one of the features. And so often you talk to business owners and you're like, oh, have you signed any personal guarantees? And they're like, oh, don't know.
No. I mean, there's all,
not sure.
Yeah, I was setting up the business, setting up the office. It was all exciting at the time. It was signed away.
So, so having an awareness of and saying, should I sign this? And then flicking it across to a lawyer or something and say, hey, actually, before you sign this, you might actually be able to cross that out, cross this out, cross that out. Yeah. And then maybe your risk in that business is actually mitigated. And the more risks you mitigate for the business, the more risks you're mitigating for you personally. And so, and again, this is not their day-to-day. So looking at lease agreements is not their day-to-day. We do it. Looking at, supplier agreements from trade credit suppliers, that's not necessarily their day-to-day. So, and certainly the legal sections of those agreements are not something that they would necessarily be familiar with. So, we aim to just provide ad hoc at the time that they need it, service to those people that really assists them in the running of the business and mitigating their personal risk, which ultimately will help them create wealth.
Yeah, for sure. Look, there's so much to the wealth, and there's such a the legal part is such an integral part. I think there's a lot of the people don't realise how important it is in my view. Some do, but I think there's a vast majority that don't. Whether it be lawyers have got a bad rep, just like accountants and financial planners have got a bad rep, and just like they're gonna charge you some money for what? Just to scan over the document. When no. Speak to the clients who have actually, where an issue has been created and the fact that they've had a contract and it's been reviewed and everything in place has saved them.
Certainly. I mean, in my previous role at my old firm, they had an associated debt collection company, and a lot of people would go through the court systems, and then afterwards they would realise that their terms and trade were not as good as they needed them to be, and they'd come and talk to my side of the business, which was more on forward planning, and we would put in place some things that actually helped them. So certainly, once bitten, twice shy. A lot of the people that do get advice have been bitten in some way as a consequence of not having received that advice. So certainly the wise ones will learn from those people. Yeah,
and that's the thing. I know that on the planning and the accounting side, it's certainly something that we say to clients, is that you're better off checking with me and paying for some advice up front rather than paying 2 or 3 times later on, because we've got to try and fix stuff.
Yeah, litigation's always expensive.
And on that litigation note, which is not the best note to finish on, but hey, litigation, that's just a reality. Contracts and shareholders, and it's a bit of a minefield, but we've got an expert in Peter North, the Director of 3P Legal, to be able to guide you through that. So whether it's property, whether it's wills, whether it's shareholder agreements, I know you look after everything at 3P. You've looked after me personally. That's all good. So I want to thank you for coming on to, today again. There's so much you could really unpack, and I love hearing about the impact that you are having. I mean, there was a couple of things that sort of stuck out at me, which was like, it's a privilege being involved in the clients' lives when they're making big decisions, and it's a privilege being able to help them prosper. And that word prosper, we tend to sort of talk about purely in monetary terms, and yes, that's very important. But there's so much to it, as we've spoken many times on the podcast. But Peter North, thanks for coming in. Good to see you again.
No worries.
Okay.
Great to be here.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. That was so much fun. It was so much I'd learned as well, right? And Peter North is my personal lawyer, but that was really good. And how's that one about the 2 days? And fantastic. Anyway, well, I'll catch you at the next episode. Cheers.